All right, so for this video today, I'm going to be talking about a pretty sensitive subject, and that's going to be satanic ritual abuse and potential ties to leadership of the Mormon Church. Now, it should go without saying that this is going to be a little bit more of a sensitive subject. I will say, however, that I have no intention of diving in to specific examples, detailed examples of what satanic ritual abuse looks like outside of broad definitions to kind of give an idea of what makes ritual abuse a little bit different than regular abuse. So consider that your heads up that this is going to be a little bit of a sensitive subject. Now, I typically wouldn't really give this type of subject very much attention. I certainly never really planned on making a video about it, but I did have an interesting conversation the other day with an LDS content creator that, you know, he and I messaged together sometimes. And so I was a little surprised when he messaged me saying that he had some information regarding something that was about to be made public, and that he would have some information that he wanted to give me once the news broke out. He was pretty vague about it, so I kind of pushed back a little bit and was basically told that in October, a group of people is going to be coming out exposing leadership of the church with their connections regarding satanic ritual abuse. Now, obviously, I'm a little skeptic of this claim, but this made me go into a little bit of a rabbit hole, looking into the history of satanic ritual abuse, some of the claims that have popped up over the years, because I don't doubt that people will probably come out with some type of claims. This is something that's happened in the past, and it will always continue to happen in the future. Now, the first thing that we need to realize is that these fears of satanic cults that are carrying out ritualistic abuse really peaked in the 1980s and kind of fizzled out going into the 90s. There's a book that's been recommended to me. I have not read it, and it's not going to be the central focus of this video today, but if anybody wants to check it out, it's called Evil Incarnate: Rumors of Demonic Conspiracy and Satanic Abuse in History by David Frankfurter. I've read some summaries of it. I've read some really positive reviews. It seems to be a good summary of some of these conspiracies surrounding satanic cults that have existed throughout history. Now, the claim that there were satanic cults in America that were secretly, ritually abusing children can go back pretty heavily to a book titled Michelle Remembers. Now, this was a best-selling book that was published in 1980 and written by Lawrence Pazder, who's a psychiatrist, and his patient, Michelle Smith. Now, in this book, the claim was that through their therapy sessions, Michelle Smith was able to recall repressed memories from her childhood in which she was ritually abused by a satanic cult. This kind of set the stage for a lot of the claims that you see popping up whenever anybody claims to have had these types of experiences. It involves human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, all sorts of chanting, blood, mutilation, and a significant amount, of course, of emotional and spiritual abuse, as well as some pretty heavy sexual abuse as well. Now, the claims that she made in this book were pretty significant, and of course, people went out and they started to follow up on her story to see if there was any validity to it. Journalists investigated Michelle's childhood. They couldn't find anything that verified any of her claims. Supposedly, during the 81 days that she claimed to be being abused by this cult, they found that she was just living a normal life during those 81 days. The events that she described should have left some pretty significant evidence, but researchers never found any bodies. There was no missing children tied to the abuse, and there was just, quite frankly, no physical proof that any of the abuse happened. The general consensus from scholars and psychologists was basically that Pazder's methods, specifically his recovered memory therapy techniques, possibly created false memories through suggestion to his patient. But these stories definitely resonated and striked a fear in the American public. And a lot of these fears carried over to the state of Utah, which is, of course, where the bulk of our conversation is going to be centered around. So in the summer of 1985, which would have been right in the middle of this American fear of satanic cults, a resident from Lehi, Utah, named Shayla Bowers, brought her children to the therapist, Barbara Snow. During their sessions, Barbara Snow concluded that the children had been sexually abused by their babysitter, who was a teenage daughter of the local LDS bishop. Other parents who had been using the same babysitter also brought their children into Snow for therapy. These children began reporting abuse as well, and before long, nearly 40 adults were accused by Barbara Snow of participating in satanic ritual abuse. So, of course, an investigation was launched. The Utah County Sheriff's Office and the Utah Attorney General's Office launched a 2.5-year investigation into the claims. And for a while, children were removed from the bishop's home. But they were returned when investigators found no evidence that the abuse took place. The case actually came to a close in 1990, where only one person, Lehi, Utah resident Alan Hadfield, faced criminal charges. His conviction was for sexual abuse, but had no connection to satanic ritual abuse. Now, Barbara Snow was heavily criticized for the techniques that she used in her therapy sessions. It was concluded by investigators that she was pretty heavily influencing the testimonies that the children were presenting to her. In one instance, a 10-year-old girl claimed that she was asked up to 50 times in one session if Hadfield had been touching her inappropriately. She eventually gave in and said yes because she was afraid that Barbara Snow was going to yell at her. Other people questioned some of the techniques that she used in memory recall therapy, similar to the types of therapy that Lawrence Pazder used in his book Michelle Remembers. Now, a lot of this alleged abuse put some pretty significant claims that the abuse was being carried out by leaders of the Mormon church, and that some of the abuse was even happening on church property. So, of course, this caught the attention of the Mormon church itself. And one of the most interesting documents that we get from this entire scandal is a memo that was sent out in July of 1990 by Bishop Glenn L. Pace. Now, he sent this memo to the Strengthening Church Members community to discuss some of the findings that he had put together from his interviews of potential victims of the abuse. Now, overall, he interviewed about 60 individuals who claimed that they had been victims of satanic ritual abuse by members of the church, specifically on church property in many cases. This involved victims from Utah, Idaho, California, Mexico, and 14 additional other places. So the claim was that it was pretty widespread and that it was directly related to members of the church. Now, he came to quite a few conclusions in this. I do just want to share one specific paragraph that stuck out to me in my reading of this document. He says, "I go out of my way to not let the victims give me the names of their perpetrators. I have told them that my responsibility is to help them with spiritual healing and that the names of perpetrators should be given to therapists and law enforcement officers. However, they have told me the positions of church members who are perpetrators. Among others, there are young women leaders, young men leaders, bishops, a patriarch, a stake president, temple workers, and members of the tabernacle choir. These accusations are not coming from individuals who think they recognized someone, but from those who have been abused by people they know, in many cases, their own family members." He also says, "Some have said that the witnesses to this type of treatment cannot be trusted because of the victim's unstable condition and because practically all of them have some kind of dissociative disorder. In fact, the stories are so bizarre as to raise serious credibility questions. The irony is that one of the objectives of the occult is to create multiple personalities within the children in order to keep the secrets. They live in society without society having any idea that something is wrong, since the children and teenagers don't even realize there is another life occurring in darkness and in secret. However, when 60 witnesses testify to the same type of torture and murder, it becomes impossible for me personally not to believe them. Now, due to the fact that a lot of these victims share similar experiences and they share a lot of details that seem to overlap with each other, there is a legitimate concern in the Utah government that this type of ritual abuse really is taking place. And so in response to this, in March of 1990, the Utah government created the Utah State Task Force on Ritual Abuse. Now, the goal of this task force was to gather and analyze information about ritual abuse in Utah, to sponsor responsible education of the public, to assist in the education of professionals, being physicians, law enforcement personnel, court officers, child welfare personnel, mental care professionals, educators, religious leaders, and healthcare providers, and to suggest needed programs to public and private agencies. And part of the creation of this task force, they actually defined exactly what ritual abuse is as a way to differentiate it between, for lack of a better word, regular types of abuse. And this is the definition they came up with. Ritual abuse is a brutal form of abuse of children, adolescents, and adults, consisting of physical, sexual, and psychological abuse, and involving use of rituals. Ritual abuse rarely consists of a single episode. It usually involves repeated abuse over an extended period of time. The physical abuse is severe, including torture and sometimes killing. The sexual abuse is usually painful, sadistic, and humiliating. Ritual abuse is by definition not a crime of impulse, but a crime committed with malice aforethought. So we need to remember that this panic was not just confined to Utah, that throughout all of the United States, there was an overall panic that these massively organized satanic cults were ritually abusing children. The FBI actually put together an investigator's guide to allegations of ritual child abuse in January of 1992. Now, what this guide did is it kind of acted as a guideline for investigators with how to approach these types of investigation. Now, one of the warnings that the FBI gives investigators who are exploring these types of cases is that it is really easy to get caught up in cases of satanic abuse, and that over sensationalism to the perceived threat may cause an investigator to see Satanism in a crime when it really is not there. They warn that the eye can see what the mind perceives. Now, it does continue though to say that no one can prove with absolute certainty that such activity has not occurred. The burden of proof, however, as it would be in a criminal prosecution, is on those who claim that it has occurred. The explanation that the Satanists are too organized and law enforcement is too incompetent only goes so far in explaining the lack of evidence. Now, most of these accusations regarding satanic ritual abuse pretty much went away as we got into the 90s, kind of along the same pattern that we saw throughout most of America. But we still occasionally, to this day, are getting accusations that surface. And a lot of these accusations do claim that leaders of the church, particularly really high up leaders of the church, are directly involved in these types of practices. You can go online and just look up witness testimonies, and a lot of these people, what they have to say does seem to be incredibly convincing. And as much as you want to say that this type of abuse does not happen, we can't deny that mankind is capable of doing some pretty atrocious things. And the unfortunate reality is that we can't just take witness testimonies as factual evidence. And kind of the issue that even the FBI runs into is you have to have extraordinary evidence in order to back up a lot of these incredibly extraordinary claims. Now, I have no idea if my friend that reached out to me actually has some type of information that is going to shed undeniable light on this issue. It seems to me that the claim that leaders of the Mormon Church are deeply entrenched in a criminal organization that practices satanic ritual abuse on a wide scale and somehow has been avoiding detection by authorities and has successfully left behind absolutely zero physical evidence seems to me like a little bit of a stretch. But I guess we can't actually say that something does not exist. All we can do is simply say that we don't have any evidence that actually supports it, other than victim testimonies, which what was brought up with that FBI statement only goes so far. So it should go without saying that obviously, if anything actually does come to light about this, I will make a follow-up video. So please subscribe so you don't miss that when the time comes. And also so you don't miss other videos that I plan on making on other subjects as well. So thanks for watching.